Hello all. For this one, we're coming back a little closer to the modern day, with a dive into the racing forms of the Ferrari 550, which participated in international competition from 1999 to 2009, although its heyday was from 2000 to 2005 or so. Unusually, the 550 was never actually intended for motorsports use when Ferrari introduced the model in 1996, and as such, several different configurations existed, which I'll touch concurrently with the competition history instead of sequentially as usual. At the time, the sports car racing objectives of Maranello were being fulfilled by the smaller V8-engined 360 racing an NGT, which was somewhat similar to GT3 and can be seen here in the side of this rather blurry picture, and the nearly superannuated V12-powered 333 SP prototype, one of the final designs of a certain Mr. Tony Southgate, who previously made an appearance on the channel earlier in his career as one of the masterminds behind the iconic Lola T70. Therefore, it was private teams and constructors that first undertook to go racing in the 550, starting with French team Red Racing, who collaborated on the build with Italtecnica and entered their first 550, billed as a 550 GT, in the French GT Championship in 1999 in the GT3 class. For those of you who have the word GT on your video bingo cards, I think you're well covered up to this point. And look, we've also got snarky remark out of the way quite early. As one would expect, the comfortable leather and deep pile carpet interior intended for highway cruising was stripped away. Indeed, most of the vehicle was replaced with lightweight, competition-level componentry, even going so far as to replace the soldered-on aluminum body panels with carbon fiber pieces. Airflow was improved to vital components, part of a larger aerodynamic rework, and maximum attention was given to the roll cage, both for the sake of safety and chassis stiffness. In total, for the early cars, this weight loss program knocked almost 600 kilograms, or 1,300 pounds, off the vehicle weight, bringing it from 3,900 pounds down to just over 2,640, or 1,200 kilos. The engine also received some additional fettling, taking its power up to 545 horsepower and about 455 pound-feet of torque. In all, something that I think most racing drivers would consider a sufficient improvement for the time. After 2 years of campaigning the car in France without much success, they sold it to XL Racing, who built a second car to the same spec and continued racing in the same series, with the second car destined for the American Le Mans Series, or ALMS. They raced through at least 2003 with an entry at that year's Le Mans, but a punctured fuel tank and subsequent fire similarly punctured their dreams of a podium finish. Italtecnica was also contracted to build a more powerful version, called the 550 Millennio, in 2000 for first racing, with the intent of racing either a sharper end of GT3 or in GT2. This largely coincided with a similar initiative from Germany, led by Frank Wieth, with Baumgartner Sporttechnik as the constructor. Similar levels of body and suspension work took place to the first Red Racing team car, but the engines received further attention, seeing their power jump another 40 horsepower up to 585 total. Torque also increased to just north of 550 pound-feet on the Millennio, and slightly more than 480 pound-feet for the Wieth car. Hewland provided the gearbox for the Millennio, and data is deficient for who provided it for the Wieth, but both had a 6-speed sequential unit with Brembo brakes, and naturally the suspension was double wishbones, but with coilovers instead of pushrods. Both cars also sported Oz Racing wheels, although of different designs, and the Millennio wore Michelin rubber, whereas the Wieth GTS wore Dunlops, and that is not to say that the Millennio and Wieth GTS were identical by any means, however. In fact, early teething issues with the Millennio's Howland gearbox informed choices made during the Wieth's design, including the choice to opt for a lower torque output. Both cost around €600,000 and achieved moderate success in the lower GT championships, but never made much odds against the larger and better-funded factory teams. On the other hand, the 550 is perhaps best known in competitive circles for its resounding successes with the ProDrive team, who developed their own GT1 version of the car in the year 2000. It was their first foray into sports car racing after nearly 3 decades in rallying and touring cars. Originally dubbed the 550 GTO before pivoting to call it the 550 GTS, no relation to the Wieth design, The ProDrive team undertook arguably the most in-depth rebuild of the 550 up to that time, most notably increasing the V12 engine from 5.5 liters up to 6. While this achieved approximately the same power output as the previous conversion attempts due to air restriction requirements, there's still no replacement for displacement. Former Lotus and McLaren chief designer Peter Stevens and former Lotus F1 designer Martin Ogilvy were called in to redesign the body, and managed to find, in addition to the body redesign, a staggering 550 kilos of weight savings, nearly a third of the vehicle's overall weight, while still preserving the general body shape and styling cues. Our old friends over at X-Track provided the gearbox, this time still a 6-speed sequential, and again Dunlop provided the tires. In the case of the 550, the fourth time turned out to be the charm, and the ProDrive vehicles, of which 12 in total were built, succeeded where previous efforts had failed. Following an initial outing during the test sessions of the 2001 24 Hours of Spa, then part of the FIA GT Championship, the ProDrive 550 made its race debut at what is now called the Red Bull Ring a few months later, taking pole position and the outright win. Though their mid-season start meant that they were well out of running for the GT Championship that year, they would take one more win out of 3 more entries that season, as well as an additional podium, before difficulties meant a mid-pack finish for the final race of the season. Nevertheless, they were off to a good start, and a second car was finished before the end of the year. ProDrive would go on to build 12 550s in total, 10 of which saw competition use. ProDrive retained several cars while selling the remainder to privateer teams, including L'Arbre Competition after they retired their remarkably successful Viper GTS-Rs. The 550s found their most consistent rivals in the Corvette C5R GT1 over the years, battling over wins on both sides of the Atlantic. 550s managed to take top honors at both individual races and championships, including a hard-fought class victory at Le Mans in 2003, with one of the 2 ProDrive-entered cars crashing out in the early morning after a wheel bearing failure, and the Corvettes putting up a strong fight early on, despite being unable to match the 550s for outright speed. The successes of the ProDrive cars, in particular, were sufficiently resounding that they convinced Ferrari to condone a factory-built GT1 racer when they introduced the 550's replacement, the 575M, but it failed to match the successes of the 550s, retiring after the 2005 season, and Ferrari has since largely stuck to mid-engine race cars ever since. While the ProDrive 550s last raced in non-historic competition in 2009, during the FIA GT2 Hours of Paul Ricard, where it managed a respectable 7th place racing against much newer cars, including the updated Corvette C6R, the Ford GT1, and the Maserati MC12 GT1. In the last 8 years or so, the chap who financed the whole ProDrive 550 project, and hence who purchased all of them back after they were retired, a Swiss person named Friedrich Dorr, he's been persuaded to sell a few of them to others that he deems worthy, with the first 550 ProDrive car leaving his possession in 2016 to the ownership of American Ferrari collector Stephen Reed. Besides the sports racers, there was another special-purpose 550 that Ferrari built and I felt was worth a mention, the WSR, for World Speed Record. Weirdly enough, this car was designed and built with the intent of pursuing some speed records. In 1998, the company modified a road-going 550 Maranello with improved suspension and steering components, largely sourced from the optional extra Fiorano handling pack, some moderate attempts at weight reduction, fitted it with the 6-speed gated manual instead of the clunky flappy paddle box, and sent it off to that mecca of speed, Ohio. Yes, really, Ferrari, in pursuit of some very specific speed records, elected not to go to Nardo or Bonneville or rent the Air Lessine from Volkswagen. They went to Ohio. And they succeeded in setting 3 records, highest 1-hour average speed for a road car, highest 100-mile average speed for a road car, and the highest 100-kilometer average speed for a road car. All of these records were subsequently broken 4 years later in 2002, when Lamborghini sent a pre-production Murcielago to break them at Nardo, where they should have gone in the first place. Ah, historical footnotes. Anyway, if any of you happen to have remarkably deep pockets and a desire to own an example of this turn of the millennium magnificence, brimming with historicity, Colin McRae's 2004 Le Mans podium finishing ProDrive 550 is up for sale today, August 18th, at the Sotheby's Monterey auction. Although by the time this is being seen, it's probably already sold. Estimates are from $8 million to $9.5 million US. For those of us who are not quite so well-heeled, at least 4 others have made it into private hands in the past few years and make appearances at historic races, at least in Europe and potentially in the US. I haven't seen any at historic races I've attended or on any entry lists, but perhaps there are a few at the Monterey races this weekend. All of the videos, photos come from this year's Le Mans Classic in this case. And for this week's Call to Action, not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
Don't forget to check your car's cabin and engine air filters. While they don't require changing as frequently as the oil, that only makes them easier to overlook, and they still definitely need to be changed. Incidentally, if you live somewhere with central HVAC systems, like most of us in the US, may as well check those filters as well. As always, thank you for watching, and have a good evening, everyone.